Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming out to our virtual tour, the first one of 2022, in fact. So today's tour, presented in celebration of Black History Month, we'll take a look at two new works of art by renowned Black artists that are currently on view at the Harvard Art Museums. So both artists, Kehinde Wiley and Rashid Johnson, were born in 1977, and the works were produced only a year apart in 2020 and 2021, respectively, which I think is quite interesting. So together, we're going to explore how these two artists treat faces, spaces, material, and much more.
Fantastic. So before we jump right into the art, brief introduction. My name is Cecilia. I am a junior at Harvard, double majoring in art history and English literature. I am originally from Ottawa, Canada, but while I'm at Harvard, I am a proud resident of Quincy House.
Yes, and I'm Philip. I am a current junior studying mathematics at the college. I am from Evanston, Illinois, and I'm a resident of Dunster House.
So here is the beautiful light-filled Calderwood courtyard, which is what you see first upon entering the Harvard Art Museums. And here we'll give you just some quick words to let you know what you can expect for the format of this evening's tour before we get into things. So usually the student guide tours feature a selection of 3 works, one from each of the 3 collections that together make up the Harvard Art Museums. But today, of course, we're going to be focusing on 2, one from Kehinde Wiley and the other from Rashid Johnson. Each of the tours is independently designed and researched by the guides who give it. So if you attend our colleagues' tours in the future, which we very much hope you will, you'll see that each of the tours is unique.
So our tours are also very interactive. So as we talk through the works today, we'll be asking you questions and inviting your participation. And we hope you will participate by typing your responses in the chat box below. And feel free to pop any questions you have in this chat box, and we will try to get to them as soon as possible. But if we don't manage to do so, there will be a dedicated Q&A period at the end of the tour as well. So do not worry, most of your questions will be answered in some capacity.
Yeah, wonderful. And with that, let's jump right in. So we are beginning our tour tonight with Kehinde Wiley's painting, which is located in one of the first floor galleries. And here are some installation shots so you can get a sense of what it looks like in the gallery. It's a really, really fantastic work that I hope all of you will be able to see in person. And here is a better look at the work itself with a picture of me beside it in the top right so you can get a sense of its scale. I'm 5'4", in case that is helpful. But before I tell you anything else about this painting, I'd like to get our eyes warmed up for this evening. So I'll turn it over to you all in the audience and ask you what you notice about this work. What are we looking at? You know, what do you see? What intrigues you? No observation is too small or too seemingly obvious to be noted. We're going to start from the ground up with this. Just get our eyes warmed up again. Flowers, yeah, fantastic. So this is one of what I think is one of the most wonderful and exciting, beautiful things about this painting is flowers, the field of flowers, as someone has also said. Yeah, these figures are set against an incredible florid background. And this background, I mean, again, I wish you could see it in person. It is so luminous. I mean, when you enter the gallery, it is as though this painting is itself the light source of the gallery. It almost makes the other works look kind of dull or dim in comparison. Somebody remarks that they're fascinated by the 4 pairs of eyes. Oh, interesting. So there are 3 figures in the work, but do you, the figure or the face on the shirt. That's a really great observation. You know, that hadn't occurred to me before. But yeah, there's these very kind of arresting eyes, particularly the figure, the rightmost figure, the kind of girl who's standing with her hip or her hand on her hip. She has kind of those proverbial eyes that follow you around the room. Body language, all looking in different directions. Yeah, absolutely. Again, back on the eyes and the body language. These figures have a real kind of presence about them. The oval frame is an interesting choice. Yes, indeed. It's also again, in the gallery, you would notice that, you know, I mean, obviously the vast majority of paintings are rectangular, either, you know, portrait or landscape. That's where those 2 terms come from. And yeah, the oval frame, the oval canvas is very striking and very kind of arresting and kind of curious to look at. So fantastic. Here is a better look at the figures in the portrait. So I'm going to tie up some of the threads that you all identified and give you a little bit more context about this work and Kehinde Wiley, who painted it. So of course, this is a very recent painting by Kehinde Wiley. I'll jump over to the slide so you can see the tombstone information. It's painted in 2020, and as the title suggests, it is a portrait of Asia-Imani, Gabriella-Esnae, and Kaya Palmer, Kaya being the mother of the two girls on either side of her in this painting. And Wiley, in case you didn't know, is the artist who painted Barack Obama's recent portrait. And his practice very much revolves around the grand tradition of portraiture. His sitters, who are invariably Black people dressed in kind of everyday clothing, street clothing, nothing terribly special. He has them pose in postures and poses drawn from the history of art. And I think before I cut out, I think I saw someone ask if it was the case that Kehinde Wiley hides sperm in the background of all of his paintings. And it's interesting that you asked. So I believe what you might be referencing is a previous or like a bit of an earlier body of work in which he did paint sperm all over the background of his very florid paintings. But most of his work, he's especially known for considering constructions of Black masculinity, painting Black men in, again, various poses drawn from the history of art. This particular, this particular body of work, that is the series from which this portrait comes, deals more specifically with Black femininity. All of the sitters painted throughout the series that this painting comes from are women. And so this painting, and I would imagine the others, do not have sperm tucked into the background. But yeah, to reiterate on some of the things I was saying before, these figures are not distinguished military leaders or aristocrats or even celebrities like Barack Obama, but regular people. These sitters in particular, he pulled from the streets of East London. And if you could skip ahead to the next slide. So turning our attention away from the figures for a moment, I want to pick up back on the question of the background, which a lot of people kind of initially jumped on, this very striking floral background. So let's start to think more closely about what it is populates the ground of this painting. So what, again, do you all notice about the background? What's your first impression of it? Do you like it? What mood does it evoke? And I've actually heard a surprisingly wide range of responses to this mood question. So I'm very curious. I've heard quite disparate answers, and I have my own thoughts, but I'm very curious about what you all think. We're all very struck by the flowers at first. So yes. Yellow is a wonderful color. Yeah, I agree. Yellow is, I think, my second favorite color. And again, I think it works in this painting to such a striking effect. Again, this is an incredibly luminous painting, and perhaps you can tell as much from this digital reproduction. But again, in the galleries, I mean, it looks like it is itself a light source. William Morris, wow, very astute, as Philip was saying. Very good observation. We will pick up on that in just a moment. The figures are almost dissolved by the flowers. Yes, absolutely. So very interestingly, the background doesn't remain the background, right? These tendrils, these branches, these stems and blooms kind of emerge from behind the figures and kind of populate the space in front of them. They cover them to some degree or kind of wrap around them. The flowers ground them, but also put them in the air. Absolutely. So yeah, in this close-up of the little girl's shoe, for instance, we can kind of see how there's this interesting kind of weightlessness, right? We might be a little bit curious about what the relationship between the figures and the flowers is. She looks like she's kind of tucked in behind them, but then again, it's not like she's crushing them or anything like that. There's this interesting, yeah, weightless kind of floating nature about them. It looks all consuming, as if there's no negative space. Yeah, absolutely. This is a very kind of busy, densely packed background. And if you could go to the next slide. So someone mentioned earlier, William Morris, absolutely. So this wallpaper comes from a particular wallpaper design by the 19th century artist, poet, and polymath William Morris. Now, William Morris was a leading figure in the arts and crafts movement, which opposed the industrialism of the Victorian age. Oh, Philip, would you mind skipping to the next slide? Thank you. Oh, sorry, one back. Oh, there we go. Yeah, sorry, I think something was glitching on my end, lagging. But yeah, so the arts and crafts movement really espoused a craft attitude towards artistic production. The Morris and his cohort were really interested in a kind of from scratch attitude, again, opposing the kind of industrialism that defined their time period, and really wanting to get back to kind of from scratch craft techniques. And Morris enjoyed enormous success as a wallpaper and textile designer among his other pursuits. And the quote that you see on this slide is really paradigmatic of his approach. And again, the pattern in the background of this painting comes from a specific pattern called Compton, which you can see on the left. It's actually still in production today. It was originally, it was first produced in 1896 for the large rooms of an English estate. And of course, Wiley has changed around the color palette, but you may notice that he's hewed pretty closely to the original pattern, reproducing it almost exactly. So all this densely packed floral business comes not strictly from Wiley himself, but from William Morris, working at the end of the 19th century. And what I think is especially interesting, if you could go to the next slide, is that Wiley has captured not only the pattern of the wallpaper, but also the medium of the original paper. So the 19th century wallpaper would have been executed in block print. And if you look closely, you might notice that the way it's painted in Wiley's work, the way that the flowers are painted in Wiley's work, really minimizes any sense of the artist's hand. It really does look printed. And between the, and you might notice the figures in contrast look very photographic. They look highly naturalistic, again, almost photorealistic. And so between these two poles, this apparently printed background and the photograph-like depiction of the figures themselves, this painting almost seems to camouflage the circumstances of its own creation. It's a painting that gestures to all of these other artistic media, none of which are painting. But there is one more important point of reference, and some of you may have already made the connection from the title of the series. I'm not sure if you caught this before I cut out, actually, but the series that this work comes from is called The Yellow Wallpaper, an apt name, perhaps, given the background that so defines the quality of this work. Next slide, please. So the name The Yellow Wallpaper references a feminist short story of the same title, which was written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman and published in 1892, just 4 years before this wallpaper pattern was first produced by William Morris. And the story is a landmark of early feminist literature. It describes the plight of a woman who has been unwillingly kept at home on an involuntary rest cure to cure an alleged case of hysteria. And the woman describes in detail this awful, horrid yellow wallpaper that covers the walls of the nursery in which she spends most of her time. And you can see an excerpt of her description on the slide before you. So she becomes increasingly obsessed with this wallpaper and eventually hallucinates that there is a woman trapped behind it. The story culminates in this first-person narrator, this woman essentially imagining that she is the woman behind the wallpaper, and it ends in this very surrealistic and unnerving ending. And so the wallpaper becomes a figure of her imprisonment. If you read the short story, it becomes almost animate, this kind of decrepit animal that imprisons her again in the walls of her home. And the story, again, was very important. It was, again, a kind of landmark of early feminist literature. And it was important for its discussion of attitudes towards women's mental and physical health at the time. So what we see in this painting is that Wiley has seized upon this moment in history where two people, Morris and Gilman, are both thinking very hard about the significance of design and decoration, and in particular, wallpaper specifically, but of course to very different ends. Both individuals have set their sights on wallpaper as this uniquely fertile site of larger resonance and significance. Morris seeing it as seeing its kind of potential for bringing light, beauty, art into the home, into one's domestic environment. And Perkins similarly kind of picking up on the sort of omnipresence of something like wallpaper and thinking of it instead as a kind of, again, figure for imprisonment, or something that has that that can have this kind of that can bear this larger cultural significance, that can capture the zeitgeist of its time. And so implicit within both of these creators' understandings of wallpaper, of design, of decoration, is that, in short, our surroundings matter, that they're not merely trivial issues of aesthetics, but that the things that surround us can really have major importance on the way we live our lives and the way we experience the societies and the cultures that surround us. And Wiley folds all of that into this painting. His work too, indeed his entire practice, is about what we see, who we see or don't see around us. And so with that, I will wrap up my section of the tour. Again, today we've looked at two artists who were born in the same year and who created these works only 1 year apart, Wiley in 2020 and Johnson, even more recently in 2021. Two artists that are thinking very hard about the relationship between figure and ground, that is, between figure and background, between foreground and background, thinking about space in very different ways, but both harnessing the power that a background or crowd can bring to bear.
Okay, can everybody see? Oh, I can only see John. So, okay, perfect. All right, so I'll be presenting Rashid Johnson's work. As mentioned before, this was created in 2021. And what's standard for any one of these tours, and I think is a good exercise when you guys are viewing art privately, I want to ask you guys quickly, what is it that you are seeing? Like when you're looking at this piece, what stands out to you? What do you remark? What are your first impulses, stuff like that? Okay, very abstract, yes. Pairs of objects, interesting. Cracked surface, very astute. Looks like tiles, okay. Paper collage, tile mosaic, right? All very good. One comment says, it's a very busy mosaic, reminds you of mid-century modern art. Very astute. Yes, all these are on point exactly. What else? Color choices are muted. Interesting. Shoes, also very interesting. Yeah. So I'm getting notions of collective, of mosaic, of faces. Yes, okay, very interesting from John. Very interesting. So yeah, so this is wonderful. Thank you. This is a great start. So we're seeing, people saying shoes, people saying faces, collective muted colors, tiles, mosaics. All this is true. Rashid Johnson is, not only is he, known for using a lot of materials and tiles in his work, but also, fun fact, he's from the same hometown that I'm from. And, this hometown is also the first place in the United States to have reparations. So Evanston. So he sort of builds himself off of this sort of like conceptualization of repairing things and sort of doing these sort of patchwork works. He does a lot of engineering, and this will be more relevant later on the tour. But yes, on the topic of what it looks like, this is indeed a mosaic of some sort, right? And so let's comment a bit more. Someone did say faces, and that is exactly correct. And it helps to even squint your eyes just a little bit. And then you can see that, someone said a pair of objects, and that's exactly true. There are about 15 faces here on the screen, and this is exactly what it looks like in the gallery. So you're getting a pretty one-to-one representation. Of course, I'll show you later the scale so you can see just how immense this work is. Anything else anyone wants to say about the color disposition? Yes, you said colors are muted, but like what else are people feeling when they first see this? Sort of first jumps, first impulses, anything. Everything's great. What do the colors remind you of? What sorts of Yes, raw science center. Interesting. What sorts of surfaces, materials you guys see? And we'll dive into more focused pieces later on. Okay, across Very interesting. So yeah, interesting, sharp geometric figures. Interesting. Yes, yes. Aha, aha. Very astute. Yes. Disrupted by a diagonal. I'll touch on this later since it's very pivotal for Johnson's overall movement. But at the same time, yes, yes, that's very astute. Okay. So we're going to dive into a deeper inspection of the materials now. So taking a look at these two photos, I took these legally, of course, in the Art Museum about last week, and it's hard to tell. Admittedly, when I first saw this, I wasn't really sure what I was looking at. But what can you guys tell me about the specific materials? Like, yes, there are a lot of tiles used, but can you take any guesses, jabs of other materials you might see be used here on screen? For instance, some that might be, they could be stone, it could be glass, it could be mirrors. Any options, any ideas really? Like, what's what comes out of it? Clay. Okay, good. So not just tiles. Yes, some paint, clay, variety of materials used. Red lipstick. Interesting. Okay, any other ideas? Wax. Yes, like crayon smears. Exactly. Shells. Yes, very astute. Oh, you guys are really good at. Maybe my photos are good. I don't know. String. Also, yeah. So a variety of materials were used for this. It's like very eclectic. People were saying, it reminded them of shoes. So there are just a whole host, a whole family, even diverse materials used for these works. I'll click over to the next slide so we can see, a different angle. So here there are some tiles. He has a trend of integrating burnt and then reburned and then branded wood. Someone mentioned wax. That's also true. It's hard to see here, but in addition to some paint and lipstick, there's also hints of like black soap, a variety of different materials, all very interesting, all melding together very well. Okay, here, even closer on two individual faces, further impulses. What do you guys see? What about their expressions stand out to you? What's surprising? What's intriguing? Three-dimensional, interesting. Yeah. So while this is a mosaic in some ways, by adding some of the other materials like the rocks, like the mirrors, the glass, it sort of adds another dimension to it, right? Yeah. Found objects from his community. Interesting. I think in some respects, yes. I mean, he a lot of times he lives in his own workspace. Looks like they're crying a bit. Okay, very interesting. So then maybe the paint could give that idea of them sort of coming to life a bit more, right? They each seem to have different personalities. Very interesting. And feeling of something hidden from view or obscured. Wow. Okay, that is very precise, very astute. I'll jump away from this slide for a second to go to the broader view. So this is me next to the work in the galleries. I'm about 6'3", on a good day 6'4". So you have a good idea of like how large this work is. The one that Rashid is standing on is not exactly the same one. It comes from a larger sort of movement that he has been working on for the past couple of years of the hikers. So this style with the sort of pixelated square rectangular faces is quite common in this style recently. And we'll dive into later to more of the lore of his entire work. But yes, this is a series of mosaics that attempt to capture what Rashid wanted to sort of portray as the notion of like anxiety, right? He first conceptualized these broken faces, the broken crowds, if you will, while in Germany when he tried to sort of find different methods of expressing himself, of relieving anxiety through yoga, through dance, and he came to this notion of being outside and hikers. And so that's exactly who we're seeing depicted here, right? And so yeah, we'll come to the symmetry a bit, as somebody pointed out, with the cross and the diagonal, all very, if he ordered materials or went back and forth. So I can talk about that now, right? So he started off by first drawing the entire thing, right? A lot of this was first drawn, and then he laid on materials and then placed them in different orders. So, sometimes he'd add paint, sometimes he'd have wax and marks, sometimes he'd burn them. It's a very intricate process. There's some really cool interviews on YouTube, if you're interested in checking those out, where he describes some of his, prior works where he made a lot of shelves and stuff like that. And so the materials we see here, mainly consisting of ceramic tiles, mirrors, oyster shells, is something very well suited, branded red oak, bronze, spray paint, oil, black soap, wax. It's a whole host of materials, and some of them have like a lot of significance. And so what is very subtle to see here is this sort of diagonal stroke. And what could that sort of mean? It's like we're looking at a mosaic with a lot of different pieces all interacting at once, a lot of different materials, lots of different faces. but at the same time, they're brought together and there's a sort of slash in the middle. Like what could that mean? Like why would Rashid sort of interrupt the piece with this sudden diagonal that's not reflected anywhere else in any symmetric manner? Like, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Almost like a scar or a bandage. Yes. That's one very, very good interpretation. It's there's a variety of ways to interpret this. And so we're diving into a bit more of the background behind this series of broken faces. As I mentioned previously, Rashid Johnson wanted to communicate this idea of anxiety and how society deals with it. Especially, in the past year and a half, we've gone through a lot of transformations to society, whether that's, novel reckonings on race or politics or how we deal with pandemics. It's a lot for us to carry. And so while individually we might have our own experiences, like each of the faces, each expressing their own different trauma, their own grief, we as a collective sort of depict our own sort of collective memory as well as our own individual memories, right? And as is seen in this photo of a 2019 exhibition in Mexico, or in the next slide, where it's more of the drawings of the anxious men, we get to really get an understanding of what's sort of going on underneath the surface. And the main motivation, at least, if we're going to refer to any sort of intertextuality here, is referencing, works from Thoreau or from Toni Morrison that talk a lot about the notion of being outside and being put outside. Hence why Rashid Johnson speaks of these hikers as a principal, figures in his works. For Morrison, being put out and put outside are two different phenomena, in which being put outside sort of implies that you're marginalized but unable to reintegrate, and put out means that, yes, at the moment you're outside, you can find yourself back in at some point. And so, I resonate with this a lot. Being of, underrepresented background, oftentimes you find yourself marginalized and you're able just, for the moment to be put out and then find yourself reintegrated. But there is a lot of anxiety underneath the surface that plays a big role. And the materials in this piece, and for a lot of his pieces, have immense significance, since, I don't know, there's a lot of important symbolism here. For instance, some of these materials are pretty misanthropic, at least in a historical context, since, the shells, especially oyster shells, were previously used as currency in the slave trade, or black soaps to have a larger symbolism of the commodification of Africa, African culture, its resources, the entire sort of black soap field thereof being commodified for a different purpose outside of itself. And in a weird way, Johnson brilliantly, in combination with the notion of being put outside and the idea of movement as communicated by the arc. And for Johnson, he, in a lot of ways, is sort of expressing the internal grief and internal disarray that's contrasted by the outside notion of stability, right? So on the one hand, we have this mosaic, tiles, and tiles are very durable, right? Like if you go to, mosaics from ancient Rome or subway stations, they're all made of tiles. Those things are insanely durable. They'll be here long after we're gone. And then he layers on there very ephemeral materials like black soap, wax, lipstick, paint, things that, well, he mentioned they're not explicitly meant to do so, but that can be scratched off at some point. So for just generally for the anxiety that we as a society suffer, yes, there are some things that are permanent. The scars internally, as someone said previously, that we suffer from trauma that are irreparable. However, what can be changed is our appearance and how we express ourselves as a collective, right? And how we move on as a collective and for the general movement of society. And in this, I really find the brilliance of his work. So sort of how he combines all these elements together in some way that you would not expect. And then the overall effect is, quite surprising.
We'd love to take any questions that you might have at this time. So feel free to pop them in the chat box as you've been doing.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Philip. Excellent tour. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are a little bit over time, but I think that is okay. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Any thoughts? Looks like we have one or two that are coming in.
Right. Someone asks, could it be that Black people, much like wallpaper, were often taken as articles for the home? I think this is definitely something that is weighing on Wiley's mind, and absolutely something that he wants us to think about is, of course, the history of Black people in America, needless to say, is an extraordinarily fraught one that begins with the kind of fundamental perversion of the legal distinction between persons and property. And so absolutely, and of course, this legal perversion is something, is one whose consequences we're still feeling very directly today. And so absolutely, I think in thinking about, in taking something that is so strongly a marker of domesticity as wallpaper, and Victorian wallpaper especially, something that we think of as something lodged in history, a sort of, I at least tend to think of kind of everything to do with the Victorian era as somewhat stuffy, and again, as lodged in history, and juxtaposing that with these three Black people. I think Wiley really is inviting us to think about issues of objectification, issues of entertainment or minstrelsy. There's a lot of when it comes to the realm of the aesthetic, I think there are a lot of really fraught operations that can take place, and that certainly have taken place in thinking about marginalized groups and the way that they can be treated as objects of entertainment, as decoration, and certainly as property. So absolutely, I think you've really picked up on this central tension that kind of underlies this work, and that serves, I think, as a foil to what I think is a rather triumphant depiction of these three figures. I mean, some of you were remarking in the beginning that they look really, they have striking kind of eye contact and very self-assured body language. I mean, they look noble. So yeah, I think this is a really important tension, in short. Can you comment on the brown vine that has entwined itself in the shoe of the girl on the right? Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. Actually, this is something that I've had a lot of conversations with people about how to parse the fact that these vines, these tendrils are kind of wrapping themselves around the figures. Should we read this in light of, for instance, the short story where there is a figure who kind of, or a character rather, who imagines her to be actually herself to be behind the wallpaper, and whether we should read this as empowerment or I don't know, something a little bit more sinister, something about reading these flowers as trapping or holding these figures behind. Honestly, I'm not sure. Again, when you see this work in person, this is something that I've seen a couple of people comment on that I've talked to about this work when we visited it in the gallery, is people find themselves immediately drawn to the shoes of the figures. Part of it, I think, is because it's a very large painting. The shoes are like kind of at eye level or thereabouts, but they're also hyper realistic. Like the photorealistic quality of the figures, I think, is most obvious at the shoes and at the Nike logo and things like that, and the shine of the patent leather. And that's where the contrast is strongest between the way that the figures are depicted and the way that the background, that is the wallpaper, is depicted. And so, yeah, that was part of the reason I included that detail, is people, in my experience at least, have been drawn immediately to that kind of passage. I imagine that there must be some kind of rationale for having wrapped the vines around her shoes like that. I think this is a kind of motif that appears throughout Wiley's practice. Is, for instance, even if you look at the Obama portrait, there are kind of elements of the background that appear sort of in front of him. I think it has, my sense, my speculation would be that it has something to do maybe with rootedness. I read them as being rather empowered in this depiction rather than trapped or imprisoned by the flowers. And so I wonder if it has something to do with this idea of being rooted in history, newly rooted in history, as though Wiley is writing them into the canon of art history and into the canon of regular history, social history. But yeah, that would be my closest speculation. I apologize. That's not a perfectly satisfying answer.
Okay, perfect. We're running up on time. If anyone has any final thoughts, please feel free to put them in the chat. And while we are thinking about that, I will put in the chat that Hope Family Student Guide tours for the spring semester are going to be every Thursday at 8 o'clock. So next Thursday, the 17th, Maeve is going to present on Theme Staged. So please join us for that. I did see a comment about whether the talk would be posted perhaps in the future, and it is being recorded, so hopefully it will. When it is, it will be on our YouTube page, which I just put in the chat. There's also a Vimeo page that we have that I can put in the chat also. So please check that out. And again, thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Philip. Excellent tour. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And please join us next week at 8 o'clock. We hope to see you there. Thank you.